We go to the phones. Our good friend, the editor of QuorumReport.com. It's Scott Braddock. Scott, good morning. How are you today?
Doing okay, Chad, although the allergies are getting me this morning. I think I need to light a cigar and burn all that out of there.
Hey, there you go. It's not tear gas.
That works, right? Is that what doctors recommend?
Yes.
Maybe I'll give it a shot.
Yeah, unofficial doctors. Unofficial doctors are fine with the cigar smoke. Well, how's it? There have been a few protests in Austin, but nothing too crazy compared to what we've seen in other places.
Not compared to other places like New York, California, Chicago, and of course Minneapolis, the epicenter of all of this, where George Floyd passed away. He's going to be brought back to Texas, to Houston, where he was from originally. And on Friday night, Chad, I was downtown and looked like we were going to escape most of this, but there was looting over the weekend. It's emblematic of what's going on everywhere. When you see a bunch of white people run into a shop and start stealing things, and somebody in the crowd shouts out, "That's a black-owned business. What are you doing?" There's all this confusion. And, of course, we've been hearing about the sort of infiltration of the protest by all these different groups. President Trump talking about Antifa, others talking about white supremacists. It seems like folks are all in the mix here. There are a lot of troublemakers. And here in Austin, police had said that they were thankful that over the weekend Black Lives Matter organizers had stood down and said they were not going to go ahead with their big planned protest.
Yeah.
Of course, a lot of people showed up anyway. A lot of people passionate and wanting to get out there. It's important to point out, I think, Chad, that the vast majority of people who have been showing up for these protests, whether it was here in Austin or all across the country, really were peaceful. Most people did not get into that, but we did see internet traffic out of Minnesota, for example, where some white supremacist groups had said it's time to go to MN, to go to Minnesota and get our loot on. So people are, of course, taking advantage of this. I was talking with my daughter about it, and, she's 19 years old, idealistic, of course, and she says, people, are probably out there because they're angry about what happened to this man in Minneapolis. And, of course, I had to tell her there's a thing called grifting.
Yeah.
There's those who always have to get involved in something, and I was just tweeting out a little while ago that, yes, it is absolutely true that these protests, to some extent, have been hijacked by people with other agendas. But we got to keep our eye on the ball here. There wouldn't be these protests, and therefore they couldn't be hijacked if a black man had not been accused of, and let's go back to the original accusation here, because I think this gets lost. You know what he was accused of is passing off a phony $20 bill to buy cigarettes.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about this right before we came on the air, Chad. Usually, you and I visit for about 9 or 10 minutes when we're on the radio on Mondays together. Could anybody in the audience hold their breath for the entire time that we're talking? No. So black people have to be worried about that at a much higher rate than anyone else in this country of that kind of police brutality. The police chief in Minneapolis, I saw on CNN last night, he was interviewed live, where he said it's not just the officer who has been arrested and charged with third-degree murder. He said all of the other officers who were there were complicit because they didn't do anything, and he would have expected that his officers would intervene, say something, tell the guy you can't do that. And instead, what we see is this outrage all over the country.
Well, I think one thing that has gotten lost in all of this, and it's because of the violence and looting and everything else that we've seen, is that virtually across America, and this is something that Rob Bro and I were talking about even before the show started. This is so different than other, at least most of the other protests and deaths that you've seen, because in some of these other deaths, there have been people have said, well, maybe the cops acted, in the right way. Maybe they didn't act in the right way. There's been debate. There's virtually been no debate at all about this. I mean, universally, except for maybe like one guy in Mississippi I saw, of course, it's Mississippi.
We can always in Texas. We can always thank people in Mississippi for being worse rednecks than us. This was wrong. That this was absolutely wrong, and that these officers were wrong, and that it's taking way too long for the officer to be arrested and charged with anything. I mean, everyone agreed with that, and then over the weekend, it all gets blown up because
yes, you do have the peaceful demonstrators, but then you have some of these outside forces that do come in, and they ruin it for everybody. They ruin the original message. They ruin the camaraderie that was there that you see during the day in most of these cities, and it just gets blown up at night, and it gets everybody angry with each other.
We have seen some actually very encouraging pictures around the country where you had some of the protesters who had shown up angry about the death of George Floyd who end up, laughing and hugging the cops who were there to provide security. We've also seen these nasty standoffs with some of the protesters and the cops. It's been a real range of emotions and just a real mix of feelings around the country. Chad, I do want to say that, for all of the talk about the different groups that may be getting involved here, the white supremacists, or, that'd be on the far, far right, or those who may be on the far, far left with Antifa that President Trump was talking about. We know from the 2016 election and about Russian interference in our elections. And, of course, we have another election coming up. And forget the talk of collusion. I know the first thing some people, no collusion, forget that. We do know from our intelligence agencies that the Russian government, a hostile actor, wanted to divide this country. And they know, and it's evident, that the issue to do it on is this one, on race issues. Because look what happens. Everything devolves into riots all across the country. And if it wasn't our original sin to bring black people to the United States in chains in the bottom of ships, then that wouldn't be possible. And we still have these disparities all across the country. You heard some folks in Atlanta and in other places saying that we've got to rein in the police, and lawlessness on the part of police or on the part of these protesters who have taken things too far. None of that is acceptable, and we need to start working on solutions to the root problem and keep our eye focused on that.
Let me just ask you, last night in Austin, it seemed like there was more looting in Austin last night than in previous nights. Is that true?
It looked like there was some more looting both on Saturday and Sunday nights, although, as you mentioned at the top of the show here, Chad, we didn't have anything like what they have had in other places. We know that in places like Houston and in Dallas, there had been, especially in Dallas, where the mayor had been, Eric Johnson, the mayor, had been pleading with people late into the night, I think both nights during the weekend, to please go home and to please stop this. I'm sure you also saw the viral video out of Dallas where that man had been beaten, and at last check, it was just awful. He had been beaten. At last check, somehow he was still in stable condition.
He was tweeting. He was tweeting yesterday.
He was tweeting, yeah, right. So, but some folks had done some clever editing of that video. The guy who had been beaten up, not to excuse what happened to him, but apparently he had also been running after people with a sword. So there was just a horrible situation playing out there. But fortunately for us here in Austin, we didn't see anything like that play out. But certainly there was quite a bit of lawlessness. And I think we're probably, Chad, we may be at an inflection point here, where if things don't get under control, and I'm sure you saw the pictures out of Washington last night, in D.C., there were fires all the way up to close to the White House, and they had turned off the external lights on the White House. Hadn't seen that before when any kind of a protest was going on. If we're at an inflection point where if things don't change here and we get on some other trajectory in the next few days, I think one thing that could make that happen is the arrest of those other officers who were called complicit by their own police chief in Minneapolis. Maybe that would help to calm things down a little bit. And, I think you asked the question on Twitter. I haven't seen if the president is planning any kind of a big speech. This is a president who, love him or hate him, and I know a lot of the folks in the audience love him, but I think they would acknowledge that this has not been a president who's demonstrated the ability to bring the country together. We have 3 national crises playing out now, all on top of each other, with the COVID-19 pandemic. That people sort of forgot about all that over the weekend, didn't they? And we've still seen more cases in Texas and around the rest of the country. We also have record unemployment, which is on par and has been compared to the Great Depression. And now we also have these protests and riots breaking out all across the country. Presidents throughout the years have had to be able to bring the country together in moments like this. Can President Trump do it? He hasn't displayed that kind of capacity before.
Well, and it's something where, honestly, I don't know, even if he made the greatest speech ever, from the White House, the division that is out there, I don't know if he would be allowed to bring the country together. And maybe that's just me being pessimistic. It could be. But we're so divided as a nation, Scott.
We are, and it's a fair point. I have often said that President Trump is more of a symptom than the disease, if you will, when it comes to the division in the country. And other people have written about this. I'm not the first person to make this observation, but if you go back to the year 2004 and look at every presidential election since, all the way through 16, if you laid out all the numbers, Chad, and by the way, there was a sea change in the way that presidential elections were run at that time. Of course, you remember that was President Bush versus the Democrat John Kerry. In 2000, presidential campaigns, the national campaigns, were still trying to do what they called targeting the great middle, the swing voters out there, the people who could be persuaded to vote for Republicans or Democrats. But by 2004, that calculation had changed, and what they were trying to do was simply pump up the base and get more, self-identified Republicans out there to beat the Democrat, and vice versa. And if you looked at if you sliced and diced all of the demographics, whether it was white people, black people, Hispanic people, college educated or not, women, etc., if you laid out all of the election results from 04 to 16, and all you knew, Chad, if I just showed you the numbers and didn't tell you who the candidates were who were running, and I said to you, because remember, everybody thinks that 2016 is some kind of anomaly, that it's sort of crazy that President Trump was able to get in there. But if I laid out all those numbers for you over all of that time, and I said to you, can you pick out the election that was the crazy one, that people didn't think that would happen? You wouldn't be able to do it because all of the numbers look the same. The numbers break down about the same for all of those elections. And to your point, we've been this divided for quite some time. The question isn't, how did we end up with President Trump? The question is, why didn't we get him sooner?
Let's see, Scott, before we let you go, the governor over the weekend announced was an emergency declaration or a state of disaster. What does that mean?
Well, in this instance, what it means is he's able to designate that federal law enforcement officers can act basically as police officers all across the state. They're looking for a way to put additional resources into place. One thing I found interesting, Chad, about this disaster declaration is that just like his COVID-19 disaster declarations, they're sort of forward-looking. When you look at the language of it, it's not necessarily that we have a crisis or a disaster just yet, but what he's saying in these is that he's assuming certain powers and making certain moves in anticipation of there being a crisis. And I know that with the COVID-19 disaster declarations and emergency orders that a lot of people have been upset about the sort of consolidation of power that's going on in the governor's office. I think with this situation, people will view it a little bit differently because they have seen looting and violence because of some of these protests, and the governor had said that, look, people absolutely have the right to protest, to exercise their First Amendment right, but he said that violence and looting would not be tolerated, so he's trying to scale up, state and federal resources in anticipation of anything bad happening.
Now, if I remember correctly, last legislative session, there was a bill that was debated about emergency declarations and firearms that I think how it was originally written in the House that, if there was an emergency declared, you would not have to have a license to carry in order to carry a gun. That got amended, right, in the Senate, and now it says basically only during a evacuation. Is that right?
I believe that's correct. I'll go back and double-check that for you, but there is some question about the law on that, and this is basically constitutional carry in case of emergencies, and as I understood it, it was only for those situations in which there was a natural disaster.
Okay. But hey, you never know. We have all kinds of disasters right now in the great state of Texas.
We do. The joke has always been, Chad, when COVID-19 came along or any of these other disasters came along, we're from Texas. When you step outside, there's always some snake or some insect or a hurricane or a wildfire or a tornado or something that's trying to kill you, and we have to think on our feet.
Yeah. Don't mention hurricane. You got something brewing down in the Gulf.
This is the first day of hurricane season. We should say, on top of everything else, the first day of hurricane season. And as I saw somebody earlier today, I think on Facebook, said, congratulations, you have advanced to the next level.
Yes, yes, absolutely. The good news is we're almost going to be halfway through. So, I mean, that's right. Yeah, exactly. Scott, tell folks what they can find over at quorumreport.com.
Texas Democratic Party is kicking off their virtual convention this week, Chad, which is, and they're starting that today. It's sort of an experiment in whether or not you can have a major political party convention all online because of the COVID-19 response, and we're tracking that for you at quorumreport.com. You can subscribe to Quorum Report. Go to quorumreport.com, click subscriptions, and you can also sign up for our free emails there at quorumreport.com.
Very good. Scott, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Chad. We'll talk soon.
That's Scott Braddock, editor of Quorum Report.